Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by an old friend, Nomiki Konst. She was a colleague of mine at the Young Turks, now has the Nomiki Show on YouTube. Obviously, has kind of been all over the place. Journalist, was also on the DNC Unity Commission, was at the Young Turks, and now kind of getting back into the independent media space. I wanted to talk to you. There's so much to talk about. Let's just start with the breaking news. Pelosi and the Democrats have put forth kind of this dead on arrival bill.
Yeah.
So you would think they could have went like super big,
Right.
considering it's not going to be passed. On paper, some of the things look good, but in my view, most of it is toothless. You have nearly $1 trillion going to states and local government, but I think a lot of times money earmarked for states and local government tend to get diverted to donors, private interests, those kind of things. And there's a carve out for lobbyists. There's a carve out for the salt cap reduction, which I'll let you explain. What is this?
I'm not going to explain that.
What is this? What is
Yes.
this proposal from Speaker Pelosi? Is this the resistance we've all been waiting for?
Yeah, this is the resistance we've all been waiting for. This actually happened in real. I mean, I was on air. I've been on air for the last few hours, and I'm catching up as you are. I think ultimately that's it, though. It's you framed it perfectly. If they knew it wasn't going to pass, then why not go big? Or is it just like the symbolism of like, giving something to their donors, the lobbyists? I mean, the lobbyists are smart enough to know that it's not going to pass. So why? What's the agenda here? And I know that they basically gave a giant FU to Pramila Jayapal. I'm going to look that up while we are talking because I want to, frame it. But Pramila Jayapal, of course, is the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus in Congress. And the Progressive Caucus is like a whole spectrum. People who probably want the branding of being progressive in their districts, but have no problem endorsing Joe Biden in a primary, have no problem taking lobbyist money and corporate PAC money. People who've been investigated for financial issues in Congress, who were in scandals where their own partners were put to jail because of their positions in Congress and the banking industry. This is not a unified progressive of caucus. So whatever power and leverage Pramila had, Congressman Jayapal had, it's minimized by the fact that it's not an actual solidarity caucus. If it was a solidarity caucus, she could come in and push more leverage against Nancy Pelosi. But unfortunately, that's why we need to elect like actual progressives in Congress so you can have a coalition. And it's also what prevents Bernie and AOC from going full throttle. And people criticize them for voting for the CARES Act. It's like, well, they just don't have a unified front there. You have to pick your battles, and it's a very hard thing to say, but it's almost like this general election argument. It's like you've got
Yeah.
shit and you've got like deep shit.
Well, what I don't understand is if it's just a messaging bill, because obviously Republicans and Trump, their main focus right now, I wish I was making it up, is to allow Tyson and Elon Musk and all these people to have liability shields when they kill their workers by forcing them to work. But I kind of get the impression, and I say this in jest to my viewers, but I think I mean it now, is the donors are making the decisions. So
Yep.
you would think Pelosi, when she knows there would be no consequence, it would be good politics for Pelosi to Biden to jump on. He's doing decent in polls right now, to say we need a replenishable debit card. We're going to adopt
Exactly.
Rashida Tlaib's policy. $2,000 a month. I think Bernie, Senator Harris, and Ed Markey have put forward $2,000 a month, $4,000 for married couples. It's not going to get passed. It would be good politics to do so,
Sure.
and then say Trump and Republicans are fighting for the corporations, but they won't even do that.
I
Why
mean,
do
that's
you
what
think
Kamala
that
Harris.
is?
That's essentially looking at that. I mean, since when do Ed Markey and Bernie Sanders line up with Kamala Harris if it isn't for some sort of marketing bill? I mean, that's what happened when she ran. She co-sponsored. She joined on to Medicare for All. She knew it wasn't going to pass immediately, and then she ran for president and sidestepped as soon as became the real power structures were coming into play. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, my only thought is if Pelosi stands up for these issues now, who's to say she'll, I mean, when the progressives come forward and say, well, we know you, even though that bill didn't pass, and you, why didn't you do it when you actually had the power? Like, there's something, I think, in just the symbolism of being the leader, the Speaker of the House, and pushing for a truly progressive agenda when she knows it's going to lose. But then there are moments behind closed doors where she actually can negotiate a progressive agenda, and she can't. And I think it's more about keeping her house in line, like the power of Nancy Pelosi in the House. There's not enough writing about that, by the way. I'm very fascinated, you know, especially from former Congress members. It'd be interesting to see, you know, former Democrats come out and talk to, maybe there's an author of a book who could talk about the power dynamics, because I'm very curious to see how she works the House that she's in control of. And she does it very well. I'm not saying that we agree with it, but she does it very well.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also,
game, right?
It's also, I mean, it's easy for me to say from the outside, but I don't quite get it because, I mean, Congresswoman AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Ro Khanna, Bernie's in the Senate, but all of them are pretty aggressive on most things, but they seem very tentative to speak out against her publicly. This Jayapal thing was the most kind of pushback Speaker Pelosi has received, and it was behind closed doors.
Right.
They have public sentiment on their side, and not just from progressives. Like neoliberal Joe Biden voters are getting laid off. Conservatives are getting laid off.
Right. That's
like some of the polls, I mean, I think it was 67% data for progress, 67% support some type of universal basic income right now, higher numbers for a replenishable type every month. So is it that, would you say it's because they don't want to go publicly against Pelosi and the Democrats right now and then be blamed if Trump were to be reelected?
I mean, that's a point, but I think going back to the power of Pelosi, like, what is she holding over them? I mean, will she actually not give them time to speak during hearings, which is big for them? Is it that they'll be put on, you know, weaker committee? I always thought that Bernie's, you know, I tweeted this out when Bernie got out of the race, and I got pushback from every single angle. You know, conservatives, I had like New York Times reporters calling me. I mean, it's just crazy. And then progressives too. But essentially I said, we forgot as a movement that Bernie is actually not a movement first candidate. He's a Senate first candidate, because at the end of the day, that is where his power lies. And the stuff that is at risk for him is not that a movement dies and he loses the presidency, which is obviously very, very important to him. At the end of the day, it's that he loses what limited power he does have fighting for working people in the Senate as one of the few voices. And he's able to leverage that power because he's an independent, because he says, you know what, I'm not playing these fundraising games that you make. I'm not caucusing with you guys, which is why so many Democrats hate them. I mean, he caucuses with them, but he's not playing the Democratic Party game, which is why so many Democrats hate him, because he's not out there running around and doing fundraisers at the same rate. He still does them, but not at the same rate, because he doesn't want to raise money for Joe Manchin. Mm-hmm. So his power isn't that he's an independent. His leverage was that he was running for president. But as soon as it became clear to them that that probably wasn't going to turn out well, he had to surrender to Obama and Schumer and probably Harry Reid, and they have some sort of leverage over him in the Senate. And that's very hard for progressives to digest, because it's not some democratic system. It is a system in which they hold leverage over progressives until progressives have a large enough number in those positions of power to push back in the right ways. And that's why it's an outside-inside movement. Mm-hmm. You need the outside.
So I take it you're not drinking the Jimmy Dore Kool-Aid these days, that Bernie's a sellout and a fraud and a coward and all these other things. I say that in jest because, like, I love Jimmy, but there are some progressives who were totally on Team Bernie when he was, like, on 60 Minutes as the front runner, and nobody was criticizing the campaign then. But now, because Bernie's not coming out strongly enough, are kind of lashing out. And I criticized Bernie during the campaign on several things, but overall, even I think you said it at the front, they need reinforcements. I mean, it really is kind of important that, like, the Paula Jean Swearingens of the world get elected, or the other progressives challenging these entrenched incumbents. The reason the Tea Party was able to do anything is, like, 80 of them came in at once.
That's right. And you know, at the end of the day, their interests aligned way more than the interests of the neoliberals and the progressives do. You know, I love Jimmy. I think we both have a good relationship with him, but
I
Jimmy's
was
a
just bringing
host.
him up. Bringing him up. He came to mind first. But there's a lot. There's a
But it's
lot of people
important,
now.
right?
Yeah.
It's really important. These people have voices and influence in the community. I know sometimes I say things and suddenly it becomes part of the ether of like progressive just because I say it on a platform, as I'm sure you do too. Like suddenly people are discussing, it's almost like they use the same language because we're media voices. He's a media voice, and with that comes great responsibility. But we have to remember as a movement that he's a media voice. And just like NBC and MSNBC and CNN answer to their advertisers, people in digital media answer to clicks. And I think even if it's not intentional, it becomes part. It's like the what's the frog boiling? You know, it's a slow process. And at moments like this, where democracy is just so vulnerable, what are we getting out of calling Bernie a sellout? What are you winning out of that? You could put your energy in a million different places that could make actual change right now. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but you could be putting all of your energy into getting Samalis Lopez in the Bronx elected, or Nabila Islam elected in Georgia. That was a seat that Republicans won by 400 votes, and she's a progressive frontrunner right now. You know, we could be actually shifting change so that they don't have to be in these positions. But if you're just going to criticize all day long, people need to channel their energy somewhere, help direct them. And so that's my perspective is, you know, I believe Bernie is doing the best he can. He made a lot of mistakes in the primary. I think the time to bring that up is in the primary, like you said, and good on you for doing that, because you know I fell victim to it too. I didn't want to speak up because I didn't want to challenge Bernie because I wanted him to have the best chances.
Right.
But he definitely messed up a lot.
Yeah.
Or he had people on his team hinted. I think that's probably more accurate. There were people there who made some critical errors. But what?
Right.
It's done. Now what?
Well, let's before we go forward, because I do want to talk about the DNC and delegates and all this stuff. I want to ask what you think, because you've worked in corporate media, I've worked in corporate media, and now independent media. So we've kind of been inside outside. And to me, for every mistake Bernie made, and there are many, I would also. I spoke with somebody from his campaign earlier today. I won't mention who, and we were both in agreement. Like, listen. I know you're above the fray, but like you got to run an ad that Biden's completely lying about his civil rights record and making it up out of thin air. That's just political malpractice. But to me, even more than 2016, because the Bernie blackout was 2016, to me, the media really, really, in an unprecedented way, steered the momentum away from him. I mean, remember, he was on 60 Minutes like 10 days before Super Tuesday. As the front runner, I mean, Chris Matthews was comparing it to the Nazis invading France.
And thank God he's gone as a result. Like,
yes, progressives really thought. I mean, if it's football, like we're on the 5-yard line, and you know, Biden won South Carolina. Not surprising. I don't think anybody thought it would be by 30 points. And between those 3 days, because you know, majority of America is not like us. They're not political diehards. They start tuning in like a week before voting. In primaries. They were just bombarded by this, I think, kind of a super PAC in 3 days between South Carolina and Super Tuesday. I mean, all the networks carried that rally with Biden and Buttigieg, and Beto came out of retirement. The $100 million in free advertising. And according to the exit polls, I mean, a lot of Biden voters made up their mind in those final days. How critical do you think that kind of media manufacturing consent portion of things played a factor in the total momentum shift?
I think it played a huge factor, but I don't want to put all the blame on that because we knew what was going to happen going into this. And I say that as someone who in 2016 was on CNN several times a day fighting for Bernie, and like, not anymore. You know, I have a lot of criticisms of the mainstream media. I think some of the targets that Bernie campaign made in the mainstream media were probably not the best, or at least how they went about it, because some of it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, if he wanted to be on TV, he could get on TV whenever he wanted. Literally, he could. It's not that's not the point, it's how you work them. Do you have surrogates who have experience on TV? Do you have surrogates who have relationships on TV? That's actually how presidential campaigns work. You know, there's a lot of surrogates that are activists, but they've never done TV before. The hosts don't know them. I mean, you know, being in this space, you walk in, you're like, you run into Jake Tapper, and Jake's like, hey, what's up? You know, DMing me during the primary. But if you're not part of that ecosystem, they're not putting you on. So some of it was absolute agenda. Some of it was just the campaign not having a fully, I don't think any department was fully, maybe except for Advance, I don't think they had a fully put to, I don't know what the right word is, like fully staffed department for a leading presidential campaign that had more money than any other race. Mm-hmm. So some of it is just like really bad strategies and moves. And I'm not saying it's like anybody's fault in the comms department. I actually loved all the comms people. I just don't think they had enough. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe there was other leadership probably giving them bad advice. With that being said, like, yes, there's a blackout. But again, we knew that going in. We're going against the corporate establishment. I think there's a situation in which people want to blame the media for Bernie's loss. Bernie's loss is because he didn't appeal to white working class males that he had last time. And it didn't matter if Biden was fifth in the race or first in the race, he had those people. And that's why David Sirota's argument about Social Security was so powerful, because if you've worked in a presidential campaign, this is just like presidential politics 101. If you want to win a presidential race, you have to look at who are the voters that you're going to lose or you are consistently losing. And they kept talking about expanding the base. They hadn't solidified their own.
Right.
So even if they brought in more students, more Latinos, more whatever demographic, they didn't have the key base that Biden won, which won him the election. We all knew he was going to win South Carolina. We didn't think he was going to get crush Bernie in Michigan.
Right. Well, I also think part of it, I don't know if it was just Bernie's, I mean, we could talk about strategy, but ultimately the candidate is the one making the final decisions. He, Jane, were making a lot of the decisions. I didn't even see that week before Michigan in his speeches, like him talking about the TPP that Biden's like still actively for, That's really. Right. Like I remember Obama's just devastating ad on Romney where, you know, the workers built the stage to be fired. I mean, you could really make those kind of ads because Biden was really a cheerleader for all these things and kind of just like became, oh, I'm not, you know, no, I wouldn't support TPP in its current fashion like 5 minutes ago, but it chose not to do those things. And I think those things would have appealed to that older white working class you're talking about.
Well, it was almost like they didn't want the narrative because they were so affected by the smears of 2016, which obviously you have to do the work to prove that, you know, I am a civil rights, you know, I fought in the civil rights movement. I have all the, they were correcting the errors of 2016 and not focusing on keeping their own house in order, which, by the way, is the same mistake Hillary Clinton made. In the general election, Hillary Clinton was so concerned about expanding her base into Texas and in Arizona that she just didn't show up in Wisconsin. And that is, I think, sometimes what happens when you when you don't have people in your ecosystem who are delivering you the truth. It's like a little bit of yes man syndrome. Mm-hmm. You read Shattered, Bill Clinton was trying to argue to Hillary Clinton and to John Podesta. They pushed Bill Clinton out. They were like, crazy man who also won elections.
Right.
Might be crazy, might have a lot of bad politics, definitely has a lot of bad politics, but he knew how to win elections. And when the operatives are like, they're the ones who know everything, and that's who's delivering the message to Bernie. Who's to say what Bernie, maybe he was doubting himself. Maybe you're moving so fast from somebody I've run for office before. You're moving so fast. Sometimes you don't have a moment to even reflect or recognize. And if all you're seeing is rallies, you might think you're doing great in Michigan. And then, and then you have surrogates around you who want to be part of that circle and may not be. Who knows? I mean, I'm not saying, it's just like, it's a little bit of yes man syndrome. Mm-hmm. I think the difference is and this has been documented, it isn't like me projecting anything, but 2016, there were more people willing to tell Bernie the truth, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think 2020, they pushed out a lot of, senior advisors pushed out a lot of folks who, might say tough things.
Right.
But, it's a money game. It's like, power, right? You want to make sure that if you're the campaign manager, you want your people around, and you want to push out anybody who might challenge your strategy because it makes you less powerful. Mm-hmm. But then you lose.
Absolutely.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.